How often do you?
QA English.
There are several ways to answer the question how often do you? Once a day. Twice a day. 3 times a day. 4 times a day. Once a week. Twice a week. 3 times a week. 5 times a week. Once a month. Twice a month. 3 times a month. 6 times a month. Once a year. Twice a year. 3 times a year. 5 times a year. Every day equals daily. Every week equals weekly. Every month equals monthly. Every year equals annually. Every 2 days. Every 3 days. Every 2 weeks. Every 5 months. Every 2 years. Once every 2 days. Twice every 3 days. 3 times every 2 weeks. 6 times every 5 months. 10 times every 2 years. 100%. Always. 90%. Usually. 70%. Often. 50%. Sometimes. 10%. Rarely. 0%. Never.
How often do you exercise?
I always exercise every morning.
How often do you do the laundry?
I do the laundry 3 times a week.
How often do you shave your beard?
I rarely shave my beard.
How often do you go to pagoda?
I usually go to pagoda.
How often do you wash your hair?
I sometimes wash my hair, about 3 times a week.
How often do you change your password?
I change my password once every year.
How often do you help people?
I always help people when they need to.
How often do you listen to music?
I usually listen to music every day.
How often do you need to go to the dentist?
I go to the dentist every 6 months.
How often do you brush your teeth?
I always brush my teeth twice a day.
How often do you take a shower?
I take a shower once a day.
How often do you get dressed up?
I usually get dressed up.
How often do you make up?
I always make up when I go out.
How often do you walk a dog?
Every day.
How often do you go jogging?
I rarely go jogging.
How often do you eat fresh fruit?
I always eat fresh fruits every day.
How often do you eat fast food?
I eat fast food about twice a week.
How often do you get a cold?
About 3 times every 6 months.
How often do you have nightmares?
Sometimes I have nightmares.
How often do you eat out?
I eat out 3 times a month.
How often do you learn English?
I always learn English 45 minutes every day.
How often do you work overtime?
I sometimes work overtime.
How often do you eat junk food?
Twice a week.
How often do you ride the bus?
I rarely ride the bus.
How often do you change your phone?
About once every 5 years.
How often do you travel for work?
4 times a year.
How often do you report to your supervisor?
Once a week.
How often do you stretch before working out?
Every day.
How often do you travel?
Once every 2 years.
How often do you talk to your friends?
Not often enough.
How often do you call your mother?
I sometimes call my mother about 3 times a week.
How often do you visit your family?
I visit my family once a week.
How often do you go to movies?
About once every 4 months.
How often do you use a computer?
I always use my computer every day.
How often do you take a nap?
I often take a nap.
How often do you drink coffee?
I usually drink coffee every morning.
How often do you drink beer?
Almost every day.
How often do you drink alcohol?
Never. I don't drink alcohol.
How often do you have dinner with your family?
I rarely have dinner with my family.
How often do you go out with your friends?
Twice a week.
How often do you take out the trash?
I take out the trash about twice a week.
How often do you make cakes?
I make cakes once a week on the weekend.
How often do you ride your motorbike?
Every day for work.
How often do you go to the supermarket?
I go to the supermarket twice a week.
How often do you go shopping?
About 3 times every 2 months.
How often do you read newspapers?
I usually read newspapers.
How often do you read books?
I read books about twice a week.
How often do you write comic books in English?
I rarely write comic books in English, about once a year.
How often do you check your phone?
I always check my phone, every 30 minutes.
How often do you play video games?
I never play video games.
How often do you post social media?
I post social media every day.
How often do you change your hairstyle?
Every twice a year.
How often do you change your hair colors?
Once a month.
How often do you cry?
Sometimes when I'm sad.
How often do you cook?
I usually cook every day.
How often do you wash your hands?
At least 5 times a day. Thanks for your watching videos. If you like this video, like and subscribe please.